Okay, how's it going, y'all? We're going to get back to What is War by General von Clausewitz, which is written in 1827. This is from, On War. His writing On War is his book one on the nature of war, chapter one, What is War? So we read the first 20 parts of this. Now we're going to read the 21st through 25th. And matter of fact, let's go ahead and read the next 8th part. Let's go ahead and finish this out. This is, I believe it only goes up to 28, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, 28. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get into all of these. This is 21 through 28. 21. War is a game both objectively and subjectively. If we now take a look at the subjective nature of war, that is to say, at those conditions under which it is carried on, it will appear to us still more like a game. Primarily, the element in which the operations of war are carried on is danger. But which of all the moral qualities is the first in danger? Courage. Now, certainly courage is quite compatible with prudent calculation, but still, they are things of quite a different kind, essentially different qualities of the mind. On the other hand, daring reliance on good fortune, boldness, rashness are only expressions of courage, and all these propensities of the mind look for the fortuitous or accidental, because it is their element. We see, therefore, how from the commencement, the absolute, the mathematical, as it is called, nowhere finds any sure basis in the calculations in the art of war, and that from the outset there is a play of possibilities, probabilities, good and bad luck, which spreads about with all the coarse and fine threads of its web, and makes war of all branches of human activity the most like a gambling game. So now we're going to read 22, how this accords best with the human mind in general. Although our intellect always feels itself urged towards clearness and certainty, still our mind often feels itself attracted by uncertainty. Instead of threading its way with the understanding along the narrow path of philosophical investigations and logical conclusions, in order almost unconscious of itself to arrive in spaces where it feels itself a stranger, and where it seems to part from all well-known objects, it prefers to remain with the imagination in the realms of chance and luck. Instead of living yonder on poor necessity, it revels here in the wealth of possibilities. Animated thereby, courage then takes wings to itself, and daring and danger make the element into which it launches itself as a fearless swimmer plunges into the stream. Shall theory leave it here and move on, self-satisfied with absolute conclusions and rules? Then it is no practical use. Theory must also take into account the human element. It must accord a place to courage, to boldness, even to rashness. The art of war has to deal with living and with moral forces, the consequence of which is that it can never attain the absolute and positive. There is therefore everywhere a margin for the accidental, and just as much in the greatest things as in the smallest, as there is room for this accidental on the one hand, so on the other there must be courage and self-reliance in proportion to the room available. If these qualities are forthcoming in a high degree, the margin left may likewise be great. Courage and self-reliance are therefore principles quite essential to war. Consequently, theory must only set up such rules as allow ample scope for all the degrees and varieties of these necessary, and noblest of military virtues. In daring, there may still be wisdom, and prudence as well, only they are estimated by a different standard of value. 23. War is always a serious means for a serious object. Its more particular definition. Such is war, such the commander who conducts it, such the theory which rules it. But war is no pastime, no mere passion for venturing and winning, no work of a free enthusiasm. It is a serious means for a serious object. All that appearance which it wears from the varying hues of fortune, all that it assimilates into itself of the oscillations of passion, of courage, of imagination, of enthusiasm, are only particular properties of this means. The war of a community, of a whole nations, and particularly of civilized nations, always starts from a political condition and is called forth by a political motive. It is therefore a political act. Now, if it was a perfect, unrestrained, and absolute expression of force, as we had to deduct it from its mere conception, then the moment it is called forth by policy, it would step into the place of policy, and as something quite independent of it, would set it aside, and only follows its own laws. Just as a mine at the moment of explosion cannot be guided into any other direction than that which has been given to it by preparatory arrangements. This is how the thing has really been viewed hitherto. whenever a want of harmony between policy and the conduct of war has led to theoretical distinctions of the kind. But it is not so, and the idea is radically false. War in the real world, as we have already seen, is not an extreme thing which expends itself at one single discharge. It is the operation of powers which do not develop themselves completely in the same manner and in the same measure, but which at one time expand sufficiently to overcome the resistance opposed by inertia or friction, while at another they are too weak to produce an effect. It is therefore in a certain measure a pulsation of violent force, more or less vehement, consequently making its discharges and exhausting its powers more or less quickly. In other words, conducting more or less quickly to the aim, but always lasting long enough to admit of influence being exerted on it in its course, so as to give it this or that direction. In short, to be subject to the will of a guiding intelligence. If we reflect that war has its root in a political object, then naturally, this original motive, which called it into existence, should also continue the first and highest consideration in its conduct. Still, the political object is no despotic lawgiver on that account. It must accommodate itself to the nature of the means, and though changes in these means may involve modification in the political objective, the latter always retains a prior right to consideration. Policy, therefore, is interwoven with the whole action of war, and must exercise a continuous influence upon it, as far as the nature of the forces liberated by it will permit. 24. War is a mere continuation of policy by other means. We see, therefore, that war is not merely a political act, but also a real political instrument, a continuation of political commerce, a carrying out of the same by other means. All beyond this, which is strictly peculiar to war, relates merely to the peculiar nature of the means which it uses, that the tendencies and views of policy shall not be incompatible with these means. The art of war in general, and the commander in each particular case, may demand, and this claim is truly not a trifling one. But however powerfully this may react on political views in particular cases, still, it must always be regarded as only a modification of them. For the political view is the object, war is the means, and the means must always include the object in our conception. 25. Diversity in the nature of wars. The greater and the more powerful the motives of a war, the more it affects the whole existence of a people. The more violent the excitement which precedes the war, by so much the nearer will the war approach to its abstract form. So much the war will it be directed to the destruction of the enemy. So much the nearer will the military and political ends coincide. So much the more purely military and less political the war appears to be. But the weaker the motives and the tensions, so much the less will the natural direction of the military element, that is force, be coincident with the direction which the political element indicates. So much the more must, therefore, the war become diverted from its natural direction. The political object diverge from the aim of an ideal war, and the war appear to become political. But that the reader may not form any false conceptions, we must here observe that by this natural tendency of war, we only mean the philosophical, the strictly logical, and by no means the tendency of forces actually engaged in conflict, by which would be supposed to be included all the emotions and passions of the combatants. No doubt in some cases, these also might be excited to such a degree as to be with difficulty restrained and confined to the political road. But in most cases, such a contradiction will not arise, because by the existence of such strenuous exertions, a great plan in harmony therewith would be implied. If the plan is directed only upon a small object, then the impulses of feeling amongst the masses will be also so weak that these masses will require to be stimulated rather than repressed. 26. They may all be regarded as political acts. Returning now to the main object, although it is true that in one kind of war the political element seems almost to disappear, whilst in another kind it occupies a very prominent place, we may still affirm that the one is as political as the other. For if we regard the state policy as the intelligence of the personified state, then amongst all the constellations in the political sky whose movements it has to compute, those must be included which arise when the nature of its relations imposes the necessity of a great war. It is only if we understand by policy not a true appreciation of affairs in general, but the conventional conception of a cautious, subtle, and also dishonest craftiness averse from violence, that the latter kind of war may belong more to policy than the first. 27. Influence of this view on the right understanding of military history and on the foundations of theory. We see, therefore, in the first place, that under all circumstances, war is to be regarded not as an independent thing, but as a political instrument. And it is only by taking this point of view that we can avoid finding ourselves in opposition to all military history. This is the only means of unlocking the great book and making it intelligible. Secondly, this view shows us how wars must differ in character according to the nature of the motives and circumstances from which they proceed. Now, the first grand set and most decisive act of judgment which the statesman in general exercises is rightly to understand in this respect the war in which he engages, not to take it for something or to wish to make it of something, which by the nature of its relations it is impossible for it to be. This is therefore the most comprehensive of all strategical questions. We shall enter into this more fully in treating of the plan of a war. For the present, we content ourselves with having brought the subject up to this point, and having thereby fixed the chief point of view from which war and its theory are to be studied. This is 28, the last section of this. Result for theory. This is the last section of What is War. I think this is what this whole chapter is called. What is war? Yes, what is war? So this is the last section, number 28, result for theory. War is therefore not only chameleon-like in character, but it changes its color in some degree in each particular case. But it is also as a whole in relation to the predominant tendencies which are in it a wonderful trinity, composed of the original violence of its elements, hatred and animosity, which may be looked upon as blind instinct, of the play of probabilities, and chance, which make it a free activity of the soul, and of the subordinate nature of political instrument, by which it belongs purely to the reason. The first of these three phases concerns more the people, the second, more the general and his army, the third, more the government. The passions which break forth in war must already have a latent existence in the peoples. The range which the display of courage and talent shall get in the realm of probabilities and of chance depends on the particular characteristics of the general and his army. But the political objects belong to the government alone. These three tendencies, which appear like so many different lawgivers, are deeply rooted in the nature of the subject, and at the same time variable in degree. A theory which would leave any one of them out of account or set up any arbitrary relation between them would immediately become involved in such a contradiction with the reality that it might be regarded as destroyed at once by that alone. The problem is therefore that theory shall keep itself poised in a manner between these three tendencies, as between 3 points of attraction. The way in which alone this difficult problem can be solved we shall examine in the book on the, quote, theory of war, end quote. In every case, the conception of war, as here defined, will be the first ray of light, which shows us the true foundation of theory, and which first separates the great masses and allows us to distinguish them from one another. Okay, yeah, so this is book 1 on the nature of war. Chapter 1, what is war? That's the entirety of it. So we'll get back to another section here, or the next chapter of this when we return. There's quite a few, a few books, and there's quite a few chapters, and they all have quite a few sections, like we've read here. So this is a good book. It's a good read. I'm excited to read it. Thank y'all for tuning in. Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, Tumblr, and Medium. All of these Marxists out. Y'all hit me up there. Y'all have a great day. No doubt going.